Intel's recent launch of their Arrow Lake processors, or Core Ultra 200S, I have an Ultra 5, Ultra 7 and Ultra 9, as I've shown you in previous videos, did not go well. In addition to the processors, we've got Z890 motherboards, and we've got DDR5 memory, regular DDR5, and brand new DDR5 CU DIMMs, which go incredibly fast, currently up to 8200 mega transfers. We've got loads of good hardware, and yet the launch was bad. Just bad, there's no other way of describing it. Despite that, I was prepared to press ahead with reviews of motherboards. After all, the hardware exists, it's on sale. Specifically, this Gigabyte Z890 Aorus Pro Ice, it's white in colour, and this MSI Meg Z890 Ace, which is a high-end Z890 motherboard, just as the name suggests. And yet, I'm not going to review these motherboards, or not yet. And the reason I'm holding off on my reviews is that Robert Hallock of Intel has spoken, and I have listened. In my launch video for Arrow Lake, I described a couple of problems that caused me a fair amount of inconvenience. The first was that a number of these MSI motherboards that were sent to me were sent with a BIOS that didn't recognise retail processors. They only recognised engineering samples. That was something completely new to me. And that meant I had to update the BIOS before I could get the system running. That wasn't actually very difficult, I just had to know I had to do it. Once I got beyond that and I installed Windows, I ran into problems, as I showed in my video, and that was due to a conflict between the integrated graphics in the processors, the IGP, and add-in graphics. The solution, we were told, was to install Windows running off the integrated graphics, and once Windows was installed and drives were installed, he then switched over to PCI Express. Again, I've never come across that before. That second problem has now been fixed, apparently, with BIOS updates, as you can see on this web page for the MSI Meg Z890 Ace. Some motherboards that only recognised engineering sample processors apparently never left the factory, apart from we reviewers got a few of them, so that's not an issue for you, the end user. And there are now updates out there that allow you to install Windows 11 24H2 without messing around switching between your graphics. If we take those items off the table, we can then address the question of how well do the processors actually perform. And the thing is, our expectations were quite low because Intel had told us in advance not to expect too much from these brand new processors. In essence, expect Raptor Lake on less power. So the Core Ultra 9 285K reads across to the Core i9 14900K, the Ultra 7 265K across to the i7 14700K, and the Core Ultra 5 245K goes across to the Core i5 14600K. In other words, you might be disappointed by what you're going to get, but you know what to expect. And the snag was that we didn't quite see that performance. In certain benchmarks, the new processors are actually pretty good, the likes of Geekbench, for example. However, in gaming, not so good. And that caused disappointment. And when you take all the different aspects of the launch together, reviewers actually got quite upset. There was another aspect as well, which is the brand new CU DIMMs memory, because in essence it was pretty much essential that you ran this new faster DDR5, as I said, at speeds of 8200, because if you ran mere regular DDR5, what is this, 6800 for example, well, it would be okay, but the extra fast memory helped. And the snag there was to do with the chiplet design of the new processors and the way the memory controller had been moved away from the processor cores, and therefore you wanted faster memory to make up for latency problems, or so it seemed to us. So the takeaway was that we reviewers had issues, and Intel has addressed this. Robert Hallock, who is a senior person at Intel these days, having recently left AMD after many years there, was recently on the Hot Hardware podcast, and he was discussing how the launch of Arrow Lake went. And he was quite clear it hadn't gone well.
We've identified a series of issues, multi-factor. They're at the OS level, they're at the BIOS level. And I will say that the performance we saw in reviews, and to be very clear, through no fault of reviewers, was not what we expected, not what we intended. The launch just didn't go as planned. And that's been a humbling lesson for all of us, and has kind of inspired a fairly large response internally to get to the bottom of what went happened and to fix it.
The question of memory latency came up time and again. I mentioned this in my own launch video. I found I had to switch the power plan within Windows 11 from balanced to high power, and that had a dramatic impact on a number of things, both performance and memory latency. I came to take the memory latency as being a quick check for whether the PC was performing correctly. So I typically see memory latency around the 85 or so nanoseconds. However, if the system was misbehaving, I'd see about 135 nanoseconds. But I also saw latency as slow as 180 nanoseconds. I don't know what that was all about, but clearly something was amiss. And Hallock addresses this exact point.
I did see relatively high memory latency, but when we got to gaming, the gaming numbers weren't quite what I expected. Was that sort of higher than expected latency? Is that part of the reason that the gaming numbers weren't quite as high as expected?
No, but that is an easy, like an easy conclusion to make, right? Like there are past lessons on other CPUs that would lead you to that conclusion pretty easily, because nobody, like the problem space is actually multi-factor. We're tracking a couple of issues internally that can combine to produce some pretty wild unintended effects.
As a world-leading manufacturer, CyberPower PC UK expertly builds each PC with the largest range of parts available in the UK. We handle all your packages with care and ship them directly to you on next day delivery. Visit cyberpowersystem.co.uk.
So when we take all these aspects together, we understand it's a new platform. We had snags which apparently only applied to we reviewers and not to you, the end user. There was this red herring to do with memory latency. Bad number looks bad. However, apparently that's not the root problem. And then there seem to be other issues. However, we don't yet know what those other issues are, although it's fairly clear that Intel is getting a handle on these things.
I know people are like, okay, what are they? I can't say that yet, but my commitment to you guys and to reviewers at large and to users is we're going to come back with a full audit, an itemized list, and we're going to explain every single one of these. What was the perf cost, what exactly happened, and what we're going to do to fix it.
That any ETA you can give on some of these fixes that you mentioned in the opening?
I hope to have a comprehensive update to folks like yourselves and Paul this month.
Excellent.
I can't say we're going to be like before November 30th. I hope so. Like things are, it's, what day is it? It's like early in November. We're tracking a couple fixes, and the early indicators look good for November. But I'll be clear, that might miss by a week. It could be early December.
After the Hot Hardware podcast had been broadcast, naturally I had a look on X, and I saw Andreas Schilling of Hardware Looks had made a post, so I responded to that post. And lo, Robert Hallock responded to me, and I'm sure to a great many other people. It's crystal clear Intel's taking this seriously. In the first instance, by the end of November or possibly the first week of December, Hallock tells us that he's going to give us a full breakdown of the issues that Intel has faced with this launch. And then we have to assume fixes will roll out very swiftly. It's going to be a two-part thing. There'll be BIOS fixes from the motherboard manufacturers, and there'll also be Windows updates, but it's quite clear that this is going to be based on code from Intel that's been sent over to Microsoft. The Windows update for Windows 11 is purely going to be a delivery mechanism. This is Intel code doing who knows what that's going to fix things. The remarkable thing to me, something I've never experienced before, is how Intel is clearly taking the blame for this themselves and is saying that other people are not to blame.
So there's a disconnect between what we measured prior to launching this thing and what reviewers actually saw when they got their hands on the platform. And again, it wasn't their fault. We have a number of things we got to go fix.
This is not a shared problem. This is Intel's problem, and apparently they can fix it, and right soon.
You know, too many companies in this world screw up and then aren't honest about it. They're not candid about it. And I'm not that way, and I'm fortunate to be in a position at Intel where I can drive an outcome that is different, and I will use my power for good to do it.
And once they do, I'll get on with my motherboard reviews. But it looks like that's going to be a few weeks yet, so for the time being, I'm going to get on with something else.